And it is my very great pleasure to introduce you to the speaker of this year's Helbing lecture. And Jan Thomas Köhler, I remember it is the 126th birthday. Oh, 62nd, okay, I mixed around the number. 62nd birthday today of Hugo Helbing, which we talked about for 2 years now. This is also the information for those people in the Zoom joining us right now who haven't been with us the last 2 days. This year's Helbing lecture is presented by Kim Oosterlinck. He holds a master's degree in management and a master's degree in art history and archaeology, and a PhD, this is getting rather interdisciplinary, and a PhD in economics and management from the Université Libre de Bruxelles. After a postdoctoral stay at Rutgers University, he came back to ULB as professor. From 2006 to 2011, he held the chair in Management of Cultural Institutions, and since 2011, a chair in Finance. In his work addressing the field of art, he is exploring, amongst other topics, the impact of fake discoveries on art markets, the reactions of art markets to monetary reforms and crises, art dealers' business strategies, the question of expertise and copies, and the strategic motivations of banks to create art collections. Kim Oosterlinck has published several articles on the Belgian, British, Dutch, French, and German art markets during World War II. He is currently co-chair of TIAMSA, the International Art Market Studies Association, and a board member of the Wittockiana. Since July 1st, 2024, since last year, he acts as General Director of the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Belgium. We are very pleased and also very curious to learn more about the topic of this year's Helbing lecture, Art as an Investment, the Art Market in Times of Crisis, 1914 to 1945. Kim Oosterlinck, please join me in welcoming him.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's both a pleasure and an honor to be here. I apologize, I'm not giving my talk in German. I can follow when German is spoken, but my spoken German is a bit rusty, so it will be in English. Today's talk is about art as an investment, and you might think, oh gosh, investment, how boring. And in a sense, whenever we talk about prices for art historians, it looks very mundane, and probably not something you're very excited about, and I understand this. So my aim today is to give a non-technical talk, so I won't show any equations, I'll show graphs, I'll also show pictures, and I will try to, well, to give you an idea on how people view the art market from the economic side. By doing this, I will talk about maybe prices affect the creation of collections somehow. Someone has to pay for these artworks, you know. Maybe we'll see how art markets react in times of crisis. And I will talk about many things that I believe shape the art markets, going from wars, monetary reforms, stock market crashes, exchange rate instability. And I will also try to convince you that price evolution has an impact on art itself, on the need for expertise, the creation of fakes and forgeries, and even sometimes the quality of artworks. The talk will be starting just before 1914 in an ideal world, I would say, for buyers. So before the First World War, we're at what we call the gold standard. So it's a very simple framework for doing business. You have stable exchange rates. They're fixed. Most currencies are a fixed value in gold, so the exchange rates are fixed. Makes transactions easy. You have a freedom of movement, more or less global for capital and people, so it's easy to transact. And you have very, very much international sales and large creation of collection in the US. I found it interesting just to give you an idea of how international the market is. Here we have the New York Times mentioning upcoming sales in Paris. So in 1913, the New York Times actually saying, look, guys, there's a collection going up for sale in Paris. So it just gives you an idea of how international the art market is. The art market is also doing extremely well. To illustrate this, and I'll move across countries, picking up the elements I find the most relevant. We'll go to France, and in 1904, you had a fund called La Peau de l'Ours. It's actually a pun on the French saying, ne pas vendre la peau de l'ours avant de l'avoir tué. Don't sell the bear skin before you've killed it. So anyways, these people created a fund, and the idea was to say we're going to invest 2,750 francs per year to acquire works by young artists for a period of 10 years, and then we'll sell the collection. The core of the collection was the Nabis, the Fauve, and the Picasso, and they sold everything in 1914 after advertising a lot and made a killing. So this is really viewed as one of the examples of an art fund. People are there to make money, and they made money with art. It's the exception. But it has really gone into people's mind that this was something very important. They were extremely lucky. They chose the artists well. They sold just before the war outbreak, and I'll talk about the war in a minute. And in a sense, it was really something exceptional. Part of the gains, and that's also interesting, the spirit in which it was done was meant to help artists. So the money they made, they spread it across artists. It made such a killing that here you have a cartoon in a French newspaper, Gilles Blas, in March 14, where basically you have this other couple saying we can't give her a dowry, but she has a very nice futurist collection. So, you know, this young woman, she'll find a husband because she has a futurist collection. So this is the world we are in before it all crashes. And that's what my talk is going to be about. World War I is bringing a dramatic change in the world as it was. It's the end of the first era of globalization. It leads to the end of the gold standard. You have impressionary pressure of the war, capital control, floating exchange rates, and isolated markets. What I will do in my talk is try to explain all of these elements and how they affect the market and why I believe they are relevant in understanding the market. A short detour by public finance. If you have to finance the state, you basically have three ways to do it. Either you print money, or you increase taxes, or you borrow. Increasing taxes in wartime is not very popular. Borrowing depends on your ability to borrow. And if capital markets are closed, it might or might not be easy. And of course, printing money is the last element. What I find interesting is if you compare the UK and Germany, for example, the way they financed the war was very different. The UK could rely on borrowing abroad, whereas Germany was basically cut off from international financial markets. As a result, Germany relied much more on a printing press than the UK. So the money supplied, and the amount of money, if you want, is multiplied by 2.4 in the UK during the 5 years of December 13 to December 14. It's by 6 in Germany. And if you look at how the art markets react, when you look at the price of the market, the real price, taking into account for inflation in the UK, declines during the war. It increases a bit in France during the war, but it's really experiencing a boom in Germany. So this is just a way to illustrate the fact that something as mundane or simple as the way you finance your war has an impact on money creation, which then in turn has an impact on the art market. If I go a bit further, and higher money supply means that people realize that there's more likely to be inflation, so they feel that money is going to lose its value. And then we have something that we'll detail a lot more when I talk about World War II, is that people try to find things to hide that will not lose its value, a store of value. You know, you realize that your banknotes are going to be valueless. What can you buy? The problem is in wartime, you have rationing. There are many things that you would like to buy, but you can't buy. There's investments that you maybe don't want to do in wartime. Buying a house, well, you know, it might be bombed. Maybe you don't want to do that. And so in a sense, the artwork become part of an alternative investment. So here for the art historians, I'm going to talk a lot about people who buy art, but not necessarily because they like it. So that's part of the focus of the talk today. The interesting thing is that this market is close to foreign market. What you have foreign buyers, but there's no import into Germany of artworks. It also means that the supply of new artworks does not increase. You have more and more demand. This also explains the rise. The price rise is present for all categories of works, even lesser known artists. And you have the arrival of newcomers with less sophisticated taste. So what do I mean by that is that you have the traditional market participants, people who have been active buyers on the market, say, who are these people buying? What are they? They know nothing. What are they doing? And this is going to be a recurring theme for this war, but a lot more for the Second World War, where I'll detail this a bit more. It's a real boom. It has media attention. There's one auction house in Berlin that's overcrowded. The police has to intervene. So it's really something that's getting much in place. During the interwar, there are many attempts to go back to the pre-war order. So people believe that the world was better before World War I, and they want to go back to this pre-war order, including the gold standard. The problem is that you've had so many years of war that the money supply is still there, and you cannot just go back to the pre-war parity. You cannot say Einmark is worth so much gold because they have printed so many of them that this is not feasible. You have attempts to get the monetary order, but it fails. The Genoa Conference is one, and that's also why yesterday when we were talking about the Switzerland in 1922, it's just 1 week before the Genoa Conference. That's why I was interested. You have hyperinflation in Germany. You have floating exchange rate and currency getting off and on gold. So they're changing. Sometimes on gold, sometimes not. You have international monetary transfers, and there's a 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression. I will try to take examples of all this and try to highlight why I think it matters for collecting. Floating exchange rates. There's an extremely interesting book by David Chalice on that. And it starts by a very simple observation. In 1906, 34 out of the 37 oil painting version of Paul Cézanne's Montagne Sainte-Victoire were in France. By 1945, you only had 8 left in France. And David Chalice is a former finance person. He's a trader. And he's looked at, okay, when were these painting actually leaving France? Why were they leaving? And what he's actually showing is that and there are several case studies, it's very well documented, 2 of the big buyers, Courtauld and Barnes, they were actually making their acquisition whenever their own currency was strong. So he's actually making a very convincing link between the collectors acquiring work abroad and the exchange rate. So basically, for Courtauld, the pound is very strong following 1933, and that's when he buys a lot. And Barnes doesn't acquire much between 26 and 33 because the dollar is low. You have here 2 business people. They're used to this. So in a sense, when we look at this collection today, we may forget, we see how they were formed, but you have a large correspondence between these people. When they're even buying, you have Barnes who's writing to the seller in France, and they're arguing about exchange rates, just because the exchange rates vary so much that depending on what date you choose is important. So whenever you look at the interwar period, my belief is think about exchange rates. What about the stock market crash? So that's also a big question. So the stock market crash, when you talk about people in finance, there's the big idea of, okay, is art actually a good investment? Does it protect you against stock market crashes? And here you have very different views on that. You have, of course, people who are reneging on their sales, suicides, personal bankruptcies, but also people who say, okay, my stocks are bringing me nothing, but my works of art, I can still, sell them. And this is something that we find a lot. Before I go to the quantitative analysis we did on that, I also think we should bear in mind that these kind of crises have long-term impact. So business ground to a halt, if you think about Kahnweiler, for example, but also block sales following the bankruptcy of galleries. So in Belgium, the Centaur, which was represent Magritte, is going bankrupt. And what they do, they refuse to auction Magritte's work because this would show that they're valueless. So what they do is do private block sales, and you get 100 works for 100 francs, which is ridiculously low. So this is just to give you an idea of how these crises play a role. With several of my colleagues, we looked at the evolution of the prices, that's the red curve, between 1908 and 1960. Actually, we go up till 2016, but I didn't show everything here. It's approximately 500,000 sales that we look for that. And what you see here is that you have, of course, the First World War, where you have a first crash, but the big crash is 29, 30, 30, 31. So you really see to which extent there is a dramatic impact of the crisis on the art market. What we usually find is that the art market reacts with a bit of a lag. So it's going down a bit after the crash. And we try to see which kind of artworks were affected. So we looked at the price of the highest paintings, the lowest paintings, which were the ones that actually were hit the most. And what we found is that the high end is more affected than the other. So it's the most pricey paintings that takes the biggest hit. The other thing that we found interesting is that local artists' market was more resistant than the others. So that's also something that we document in the paper. And sadly, for the people who believe that art is a good investment, we also show that the art market returns were actually worse than the equity. So buy art because you love it. That's the main message. And now I'm going to World War II, which is going to be the bulk of my talk, which makes sense because of the pain. So what I'll do is compare three occupied countries. I'll spend a lot of time on Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. I'll talk a bit about the UK and Germany. I'll show indices. I won't go into the methodology. It's a statistical way to make price indices. For France, I used these 8,000 value. For the Netherlands, there's something 11,000. For art price currents, it's 500,000, and for Germany, it's 12,000. So why do we do these price indices? Why should we care? We cannot go back and invest in time. We started because we wanted to know, okay, what's the price evolution if I compare these countries? And here you have 4 countries that are pictured. There's not always the same coverage because we don't have always data for the same years. The first thing that stands out is the black and the yellow curve, which look alike a lot. These are the evolution of the Netherlands and Germany in real terms. So when I'm talking about real terms, adjusted for inflation. So if you start in 1940, in 1945, you'd have something like the price of a painting would have been multiplied 5-fold. So if you could buy 1 bread with 1 painting in the building, you can buy 5 in 45. You will notice that the 2 curves are very much similar. And we attribute this again to an exchange rate story, the fact that the Dutch guilder at some point during the war is made directly convertible with the Reichsmark. So it's basically a market that's integrated. For France, you have this very strong increase up till 44 and then a strong decline. And for the UK, you have something which is a small decline and then it's gradually slowly goes up and then goes down. So looking at this, we try to understand what drove the boom. So why do we want artwork in wartime? I mean, I can live without artworks. It's tough, but in wartime, maybe acquiring artwork should not be your priority. And we go back to war finance. So you have money creation, you have inflation expectations. And in France, I'll give the example of France, but it's the same in the other country, then they enter into what we call financial repression. What is that? What's that animal? Basically, what they're trying to do is to convince people to buy state bonds. So what they do, they print money. Money goes out, is being spent. But of course, if the money stays outside, it generates a lot of inflation. So what they want to do is to convince people to give their money to the state back through state bonds so that the inflationary pressure is lower. But it's not a good investment. You don't really invest in state bonds during wartime because it has a fixed income, so it's a fixed interest rate and there's high inflation. So what they do, they convince people, so basically they force them by different ways to buy these state bonds. What I will also discuss is that this leads to limited investment opportunities. So the gradual state is cutting. You have this money because there's a lot of money supply, but there's nothing you can buy with it. And so this is also being curtailed by the way the state acts. I'll discuss this in a minute. This generates a black market, but the black marketeers, they also have this problem on what should I do with my illicitly earned money? So what do you do if you've earned a lot of money and you want to hide it? And of course, you have for occupied countries, German buyers with unlimited means. In a sense, what triggered my interest was a paper I was writing about French financial history. And I was looking at the French Stockbrokers Association annual meetings. And what they were saying here is the only way to spend all the cash we have is basically the auction house and the stock exchange. But at the auction house, the prices are free. And that's why we have all these incredible price increases for whatever is put up for sale. For a finance person, this is completely crazy. I could never imagine today the people at the New York Stock Exchange complaining about the competition of Christie's. This would be ridiculous. So it's really telling you how big a phenomenon it is. So I tried to investigate why you would want to buy art. So the first thing I wanted to see if it's inflation proof. So state bonds are not inflation proof. Equity and foreign exchange could be. Gold, of course. Art, yes. Real estate, yes. Is it legal to hold it? So what's interesting, it's legal to hold both state French bond because they try to force you to buy them. Equity is okay. It's illegal to have foreign exchange. It's illegal to hold gold story. You're allowed to have art and you're allowed to have real estate. Can you flee with it? If you need to go away, can you take it with you and resell it abroad? Very difficult for bonds or equity. You're not going to sell a French bond somewhere in the UK. Possible for exchange gold. For art, up to an extent, of course, not for real estate. Is this market controlled by the occupying forces? It's very much controlled for the stock markets. It's not really much controlled for foreign exchange. There's a black market. There's a bizarre situation. There's a black market in gold, but the occupation forces know where it is and actually buy on it. So it's a bizarre situation. Art is a very limited controlled, and real estate, I don't know. Is it discrete? So can you hide a lot of money in something very small? And this is of interest for two kinds of persons, the people who've made a lot of money and want to hide it, and the people who need to flee. And of course, the bonds and the stocks, they're not discrete. You cannot hide high value. It's something that you cannot transfer with you. For an exchange, you could. Gold, you could. Art, yes, you can. So I tried to investigate, okay, what were the motivation of these buyers? What is going on actually? Why would you buy art? And you see where I'm going, that people are trying to buy art not because of the love of art, but for other reasons. I also tried to put this into perspective, and this is my comparison point between different investments that I could have made. So everything that's low is the bonds, the equity, they're pretty low. The one that's outperforming everything is the art market. And the big pink things are collectible stamps. So why would you want to have collectible stamps? Why do they go through the roof during the war? Exactly for the same reason that you can hide a lot of value in something very small. And if you get arrested by someone, the likelihood that the person who arrests you knows that this stamp is valuable is a lot lower than if he or she coats you with a gold coin. So the first thing I documented was this high price increase for collectible stamps and for the art markets, the more liquid artists. Then I tried to say, okay, am I dreaming, or are people saying that something's going on also in the press? I like to have several quotes. Here it's a quote from Belgium, the farmer who got rich and who allows a painting. It's hard to translate the style calendrier touring club. So from a style of what you would have a very cheap, like you know, the Pirelli calendars. Well, worse than that. Really something that's really ugly painting. To reach prices at auction worthy of a citation in the press only deserves a smirk from the people who know. In 2 or 3 years, the same farmer would like to resell this painting because the speculation of the butter would no more be so lucrative, and will be shocked not to find a single amateur. In France, David, who's an art dealer, says, I knew a few of them, new rich. They bought anything at whatever price. So you have this huge increase of non-specialists, I would say. Why this interest? It's also, if you like literature, there is a very nice book by Marcel Aimé called Uranus. And the main character is Mongla, and Mongla is a wine merchant who's doing black market. And you have quotes in this book that are just spectacular, where Mongla says, I hate paintings, but I don't know what to do with my money. I hate these Renoirs, but what else can I do? But of course, you have people who want to hide their wealth and they need to flee. So I asked myself, okay, maybe I can test this. Maybe I can try to see if statistically I can see a price evolution that's different for small artwork versus large artwork. And I did it on two things. The first one, I look at small easy transferable assets that can store a lot of value in one case. That's for France I did. And the other one, I'll come back to monetary reforms afterwards, including for Germany. After the war, when many countries had monetary reforms, and what they did, they declared the banknotes valueless. So you want to reform your currency, this banknote is now valueless, you're allowed to exchange so many, which means that people have to spend these banknotes very fast. And what you want to see is, what do they buy it on? And my suspicion is the only thing they can buy it on is our investments that are real goods, but are not in a controlled market with rationing. So here you have a comparison of the price evolution of small versus large artworks. So what did I do? I took the 25% largest artwork, the 25% smallest artwork of my database, and I looked at the price evolution. And what you can see is that there is a stark difference during the war between the price evolution of small artworks. It's a much more steeper dynamic than large artworks. Economists like to test if it's statistically significant because these figures might look different. They're not necessarily different. It's especially different between the second semester of the first semester of 42 and the first semester of 43. This is a moment where black market is thriving in France, and at the same time when it's still possible more or less to flee France. At the end of 1942, it gets a lot more difficult to flee the country when Germany invades the so-called free zone. The other thing I did is I test in Belgium if this monetary reform had an impact on the market. The problem is I didn't have data before, so it started in October. That's when the monetary reform happens, but you see a huge price decline. And there I also have evidence from people saying people are buying artwork not because they loved work, but because they knew that their banknotes would become valueless, and that's why they bought art. Okay, but if there's a price increase, what are the consequences? Well, maybe you want to become an artist. Or maybe you have new art dealers. Maybe you have bad new artists. And maybe you have lots of fakes and forgeries, which would need more of expertise. That's what economics would tell you. Tell you if there's a price increase, it pays to do the job. I should change job. I should become art dealer. Why not? Maybe I'm not gifted. Maybe I'll do fakes and forgeries, and maybe we'll then need expertise. And that's what I looked at. In the Netherlands, that's probably the most extreme case. You have advertisements in the press to take drawing class and become rich. So this is something that whenever your parents tell you shouldn't do art, you say, hey, look, in 42 in the Netherlands, that's what you should have done. In Belgium, there's Elslander, who's a contemporary observer, who say all the decorators, all the people who are doing decoration, so not very high quality, decided to become artists, and amateurs were not even seller of French fries. This is really, really bad in Belgium. Both an easel and a color box to become painter. Of course, what do you have? Bad quality. And you have fight against kitsch. And this is also a bit in Germany, even though it's not very much advertised. In October 40, you have an Einordnung gegen minderwertige Kunsterzeugnisse in Germany. Yeah, it sounds very bizarre. But it's not very much applied. And there's even a strong increase in the low arts price, low-end market, leading to demands of price control. In the Netherlands, you have legislation to forbid the export of the kitsch painting back to Germany. So you want to protect the German. And here you have on the right-hand side an exhibition in Leeuwarden, wansmaak en gezonde kunst. So bad taste and healthy art, where you, of course, you don't have to get an explanation. What the donkey is doing is probably not what they want. So this is one of the consequences. I know I'm not talking much about looting. I just have a different perspective, but that's what I think I was asked to do. So even though I'll come back to that later on. You have also new businesses. So you have a very strong numbers increase in art dealers in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. And I think this is something that people underestimate as one of the difficulties to do provenance research. You have all these newcomers, they have no history. They're probably most of the time selling bad stuff, but sometimes they're lucky enough to sell good stuff. And this is really problematic because they're very badly documented. Here I've taken a quote from the Volk, Dutch newspaper. So basically the art store are really, I mean, getting out of the ground as mushrooms. You have art stores, art store handles, different ways, art sellers, art caves, what is it? Sellers, yeah. Art attics. Everyone is looking for interesting propositions, and everybody is actually mentioning his love of art. Or is it because they think of investment in the year 1942? Yes, even in the publicity columns, you have very nice paintings that are actually offered for sale, not one or two at the same time, but sometimes for dozens. So it's really interesting to see. So I tried to figure out, okay, is this really true? So this is a cartoon from 1945 in the Netherlands where they're actually explaining what was going on during the war. The first one is actually weg met de kitsch, so get away with the kitsch. So this is the Cultuurkamer, who's actually trying to control the quality of the art. And what you see below is actually who is selling artwork. The kapper is the hairdresser. The sigaren, well, it's people who sell cigar. And here, Mangelman, it's a more complicated story that could have different interpretations. What's interesting is you have businesses which had come out of supplies, cigars. Well, there's no much tobacco to sell, so they change jobs. Stationaries change job, fuel companies change job. It's true also in Germany. You have the same going over, and the barber shop decides to become a an art dealer. But also the boom in prices means there is a higher interest to create fake paintings and or to forge signatures or on existing ones. In Belgium, one of my favorites is because one of the museums I run is the Magritte Museum, is that you have strong suspicion that Magritte is making fake Braque, Picasso, and De Chirico during the war. So it's not, I always wonder what a fake De Chirico by Magritte could fetch at auction today. I wish I could see one. Assouline mentions a number of modern fakes in France. And in the Netherlands, you have this very weird thing where you have a very well-established auction house, Mac van Waay, which actually signaling that it's selling fakes and forgeries to avoid the risk of empty walls. How does it do that? These are the auction catalogs that I prefer to read. So Likert with a question mark, and if you think it's signed, they say it's fully signed. So if it's fully signed and there's a question mark on the name of the person, there's probably something wrong. Then they say Dutch cool, it's signed Koekoek. That's unknown master, signed Anton Mauve. Teniers, copy after, fully signed. Bergen Dirk van Bergen, signed A van de Velden. And it's very interesting. So Dutch cool in the manner of Jan van Hooyen, say it's monogram, they say it's according to the expertise, it's correct, blah, blah, blah. Still, they say it's Dutch cool. So we have this very bizarre thing where auction houses, and we try to understand that with Jeroen, my co-author, what was going on. And our understanding is that this is a very reputable auction house before the war, and they want to keep this reputation. And so that's why they signal that they're selling things where you should not necessarily believe what you see on the painting. And I think it's quite an exceptional case. This is also from the museum's collection, and I think it's one of my favorite auction catalogs. So we have this fake Manet. It's written in French, faux, fake. You have a provenance, a collection of someone. You have the certificates by 5 people, but nonetheless, it's a fake. You have the Henri dit Le Douanier Rousseau. It says withdrawn, retiré, fake, and sold without guarantees. So this is not the page where I have 2 fakes. If I look at this Galerie Renaissance catalog, I would say this is the norm, not the exception. So the number of fakes is mushrooming, really. And here they actually even find a title that's credible. I mean, credible up to a point when you know Manet's oeuvre. In France, the painting that fetched the highest price at auction during the Villot sale in 42 was this Cézanne, La Vallée de l'Arc et la Montagne Sainte-Victoire, which is an interesting case because the drawing is original, but someone else added the color. So to me, it's a fake. And then you have the low quality artworks. This is supposed to be a Gerard Dow. Yeah, whatever. So this increase in gillable buyer, it's also the same. Yeah, and that's echt real true. And also the people are doing the black market. I mean, it's really this cartoon is really showing all these elements. There is a third character. I'm not talking much about him, Vitaly Bloch. He's a specialist of Vermeer. He's also surviving the war. We know, and Friedlander is the one that's most researched. He's protected by Hermann Göring. And Elson asks a good question: Is Friedlander's, art knowledge so special that no one? I mean, that he's protected just for that. I mean, we can't understand this. Why is it so special? Gustav Kramer, I worked a lot on his correspondence at the Getty Research Institute. It's very interesting. My reading is he survives for two reasons. The first one is connection with German art dealers. He's working with Haberstock, Böhler, and Hans Posse, but also because of his expertise. But what expertise? So here I'm going back to do the economist's point of view of expertise to understand this. In economics, we view authenticity as a meta-credence goods. What does it mean? So you have goods where you know before you buy them if you will like them. It's something very easy. If you want to compare to computer, you look at the power of the computer, say, okay, this is more powerful than the others. These are goods where you can have an a priori, you're informed. You have goods that you only know if they are good if you experience them. Wine. Is the wine good? Well, you bought the bottle. If you're lucky, it's good, but you only know it after you've drunk it. And here they introduce Oosterlinck et al. It's a very interesting paper. The fact that actually authenticity on the market is a belief. You can never be sure of authenticity. So it's a meta-credence. And they develop a whole system to say, okay, if you're an expert, you always have a balancing act to do between declaring something genuine as fake and declaring fake something that's genuine. It's really something where we have to balance in the two. What we have is that we have a Friedlander as an expert. So you could say, oh, it's because he's the best. And honestly, I've read a lot of correspondence. Some of these colleagues have doubts. So I've taken this letter from Kramer to Haberstock. So Friedland is writing certificates continuously. Yeah, they're not worth much. The lay people are astonished, but the real people are wondering why. And Dow, Rembrandt, and Van Gogh, for example, just to name a few, would turn around in their grave if they read his latest outpourings. This is not just one example that I have where people are questioning Friedlander's quality. So you could say, okay, is it because he's the best, or is it because he's believed to be the best? And there is a difference in between the two. Kramer's strength is, my reading, is ability to source genuine artworks valued by the regime and other art dealers. If you read his correspondence, Gustav Kramer really narrowly escapes death. So it's really something where he managed to survive. He's sourcing across Jewish persons who are hiding, so he's part of that. But that's how he gets to survive. He's really clever in the way he's doing his dealings because he's promising to art dealers to get protection from several art dealers. So how do economists view this? Economists view this, I mean, my reading is what we call the superstar effect. So what's a superstar effect? I'm going to Pavarotti, which is a bit of a different story. But there's a very famous paper by Rosen who's tried to understand why in the musical world you have some people who are a bit slightly more talented than others and they get it all. So in a sense, he's trying to say, okay, you have very many good singers, but why is there always one that really captures most of the market and not the other? And the idea is that being the best, even by a slight margin, produces considerable advantages. And there's a whole model in that. And in a sense, you think about it, if you have a disease and you get the choice and you have money, okay, let's start with something positive. You have the choice to get cured by the best doctor or the second best doctor. What would you choose? I mean, would you be ready to pay much more for the best doctor? It's a bad disease. Or you say, no, nah, second best is good too. Of course not. And in a sense, what I argue in the paper I wrote in 2022 is that this case, the advantage 22 life or death. You have a market where you have lots of fakes. You have lots of forgeries. They're extremely expensive to buy. You want the best if you are the Nazi regime. And so this explains why the best survive and the second best do not survive or survive up to a point. So there's a very sad case of Abraham Nijstad, who's an art dealer in the Netherlands, and he's actually just a bit less successful on Kramer. He survives up till the summer 44, which is, for the Netherlands is also extremely late, but is murdered a bit later. But you have other art dealers who survive also because they have this, I would say, superstar or effect. So Leon Morpurgo, who's an art dealer, also Jewish, is arrested, but he becomes restorer of looted artwork. So he has a value that is valuable. So, of course, this is the price evolution. These are the elements. But you could ask yourself, okay, Kim, but we know that there was a very strong taste for, I would say, Dutch, German, Flemish art by the Nazi dignitaries. Maybe the price evolution is not the same for the whole. I compared in the paper the Netherlands and France with Jeroen. What's difficult to do is that all these auction houses in all these countries have different definitions. So in the Netherlands, what we had for the auction we worked for were old masters. Okay, this is generic definition that we usually have more or less the same everywhere. Romantic, which is a bit more specific, and modern. But modern for the Dutch, for this auction house, would be Anton Mauve, which is not really modern. If you compare France, in France in 1940, you have a range of artworks that go from old master to very recent works. You would find works by Picasso, etc., sold in France. And so, of course, it's a question. You can also ask yourself, okay, you have all these new buyers. Do we see their new taste? So there is a book by Raymond Moulin where she says people were actually active on the market at the time, said these newcomers, they love to buy basically flower paintings. That's, very decorative. They like it. Okay, why not? So what I tried to do in my paper of 2017, I tried to see if, okay, we had a difference in taste. It's not really degenerate art because there's no proper definition. So I should probably say I've attempted to see the price of movements which would have been viewed as such in France. Anything that's painted by Jewish or pro-Soviet painters, paints belonging to abstract movement, Cubism, all these movements. And I know Impressionism could be in between, but I put it in there, knowing that if I put it in there and I find a result, it actually strengthens my result, because otherwise it should turn it down. And so what I find here is if I compare what would be viewed as degenerate with non-degenerate, it seems that there is a big difference in the beginning. And that's actually exactly what we find. 38, 39, the non-degenerate artworks are selling at a higher price on average, the price movement, and the degenerate are going down. But this is mostly due to the sale by, the emptying of German museums. So they flood the international market with these artworks, supply and demand, it goes down. In France, I see a difference up till the first semester of 41. And that's where you still have some uncertainty regarding the fate of these artworks in France. But very fast, you're allowed to own degenerate art in France. They were viewed as, the Frenchmen were viewed as degenerate anyway, so they could degenerate themselves a bit further, according to a quote in François Bertrand d'Orléac. Afterwards, the prices are converging. So this is really interesting also to see how people viewed the works during the war. What about Germany? I will go fast on Germany, but I think it's interesting. There's a strong boom. They're attracting artwork from all over occupied Europe and buying there, driving price upward. So that's well documented. There are monetary fears. The problem with Germany is that's the main problem. We find less people really daring to say so necessarily in the press. You have many local variation. I worked with Jeroen on that, and we see that there are lots of changes. And after the war, because I liked the monetary reforms, there's this Währungsreform in June 48 when they create the Deutschmark. And the interesting thing is that you find exactly what I described for Belgium in 1944. Many people fearing that the money would become worthless. Mostly people were doing things in the construction and black market and buying artworks of relatively low quality. And of course, what happens when you have the monetary reform, there is their artworks, they resell it, the prices go down. What about the UK and the US? So USA, I don't have a price index, but I read a few, I read several archives on that. So in both cases, there's a strong price decline at the beginning of the war. And this is really a very contrasting evolution if you compare it with Germany. I'm taking here a quote from Thomas Harris, who's a dealer, who's in October 39, I've seen no one from the trade for the last week, nor a single customer come in. So it's really bad. In March 41, which is pretty late, I need to do one substantial deal, even at a considerable sacrifice, tide us over for several months, whilst we are unable to do any business here. The markets change as the war prospects becomes better. So you really start to have a price increase starting 42. I mentioned earlier that people were trying to flee with their artworks. And of course, what do you have? You find them back in the UK. The price of small artworks is increasing compared to large artworks at the very beginning of the war, when there was still fear that Britain might be invaded, and then they convert to the others. The other interesting thing, and that's something that more from the US, is quotes from our dealers who say, all these refugees are our dealers. So that's basically one of the quotes. These people have come their art with them. There's something that we should not underestimate, difficulties to sell abroad. So when you look at this correspondence between the UK, where the US is a big market, physical risk is often mentioned, exchange rate risk is also often mentioned, and insurance. So I find a lot more evidence about insurance being a big issue in the UK than what I've seen in France and Belgium, but maybe I haven't looked at the right places. But there's a reason for that. There is a real war risk. So this is Christie's in April 41. And I, of course, love the quote for Thomas Harris. So one gets so used to the blitz that unless it happens to which is just too bad, there seems little use in letting it play too big a part in one's life. And so this is really affecting also the British market. You have this war risk, which comes only later in Germany or in occupied Europe. So this is it. I've tried to highlight the role played by the economy on the art market and on collection and collecting. I think that the macroeconomy, exchange rate, investment opportunities, monetary reforms, I think they somehow shape the market. And I hope you found this a bit interesting. Thank you for your attention.